George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Free Julian Assange, after almost 5 years in a London dungeon for telling the truth to the world about what our leaders are doing in our name with our money under our flags. It's the witching hour in the High Court in London on the Strand. Thousands will gather outside the court to bear witness to whether British justice is a thing of the past. And a shiver ran along the Labour front bench looking for a spine to run up. Has KeirStarmer found a spine? Today at the Labour conference, as I breathed down the Labour neck in the Rochdale by-election, he finally called for a ceasefire and an end to the fighting right now. It's a pity that 100,000 people had to leave their blood, many of them their guts, on the ground of the Gaza Strip, under the rubble, in the cold earth, to change his mind. It's going to be, I promise you, the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Before I go any further, I have issued legal proceedings through my solicitor KRW Law in Belfast against Sky News and Rachel Johnson, the sister of the erstwhile Prime Minister Boris Johnson, for egregious and grotesque libel uttered live on national television and not contested, let alone contradicted, by the person conducting the interview, one Trevor Phillips. I will not be saying anything more about this case until it comes to court, and anyone who's calling the show this evening should make no further reference to the case. I hope I've made that clear. Should that happen, we will have to cut you off immediately. A libel on live television in the middle of a crucial by-election campaign, it doesn't get much more serious than that. A much more serious case, however, does unfold in the High Court in London in the Strand this week, 20 and 21st of February. Julian Assange is a friend of mine. I thank the Lord that I am able to say that. Julian Assange is one of the great heroes of the 21st century. Julian Assange is the world's most important publisher, most important journalist, most important teller of the truth, which is why he spent nearly 5 years in a London dungeon, Belmarsh jail, built for mass murderers, child rapists, and terrorists. This gentle man has been held in solitary confinement, subjected to gruesome and unrelenting prison oppression. Oscar Wilde had nothing on the trials of Julian Assange. He spent almost a decade inside the Ecuador embassy for fear that he would be extradited by Sir KeirStarmer, no less, to Sweden to face fake, invented charges of rape and sexual assault. He had to do that because he knew, I knew, and remarkably, some people who should have known did not know that the purpose of these allegations, the purpose of extradition to Sweden, was the quicker to extradite him into the maw of the US injustice system. I visited him many times in the Ecuador embassy. I sang Frank Sinatra to him from outside the window of the Ecuador embassy, just beside Harrods in London. I did not know that entirely illegally the CIA was spying on me and on all of Julian's other visitors. Even in the embassy toilet, we were being filmed and spied upon. And more importantly than his visitors, his legal team discussing his legal case and cases and the charges against him from the United States of America were also being illegally spied upon. They were being illegally filmed. It is almost unbelievable that any case could have been allowed to even proceed, let alone with the prisoners behind bars in Belmarsh jail, when it is now an admitted and accepted fact that the prosecution, the United States government, was illegally spying on the lawyers of the accused man and was then privy to every single aspect of his defense. In any jurisdiction in the whole world, that would be the end of the case, but not under British justice today. This case has not just been allowed to proceed. It has not just been allowed to proceed with the accused person unconvicted of any crime to be left languishing in that dungeon. But there's a very real danger that within a few days, the great journalist, the great publisher, the great truth teller, Julian Assange, will be on a plane to the United States of America, to a hanging judge and jury in Virginia, home of the CIA, and thence to 145 years in a supermax penitentiary from which we will never see his face or hear his voice again. It doesn't get any more serious than that. The reality is that these hypocrites in America, in Great Britain, were forever telling us how journalism is not a crime, but only if it's a journalist in trouble in a country that they don't like. I always ask them, did you ever hear of a man called Julian Assange? And they never reply. Every time they talk about a journalist from the Wall Street Journal in jail in Russia, I ask them if they've ever heard of a man called Julian Assange, but they never answer. Julian Assange is the world's #1 political prisoner because what he told us about were grievous political crimes committed by our governments in our name, on our dime, under our flag. He told us what the criminals were doing. And when the criminals get to imprison the people who reveal their crimes, then we truly are living in dystopian and criminal times. That's the long and the short of it. If Julian Assange is extradited this week, they'll have him on a plane before his feet can touch the ground back in Belmarsh jail. We'll never see him again. His little children will never see their father again except through a glass screen in a supermax penitentiary thousands of miles away. His wife will never kiss his face again, ever, except through a glass darkly. It is one of the greatest crimes of this century so far. Certainly the greatest crime against journalism, against broadcasting, against freedom of speech and expression, against the right of the citizen to know what is being done in his name at his cost. It will be a travesty of justice. I have many times said, and I mean it, that whilst all of the institutions in this once proud Great Britain have been corrupted and hollowed out, in my experience, the judiciary is the least corrupted, is the least hollowed out. And so I have, throughout these proceedings, entertained the hope that the judges would find for justice, that the judges would rescue us from the shame that our government has placed us in this regard, as in so many others. I have gradually begun to lose hope as judgment after judgment went against my friend Julian Assange. But there is one last hope, and that one last hope is that the British judges this week decide to call a halt to this grotesquely expensive charade, this shame, this smear on our reputation, already so badly tarnished by so many other things, that the judges speak for Britain, speak for the free people of the world, and free Julian Assange this week, so that we can all kiss him at least one more time. How badly we miss him today. If he were here, if WikiLeaks under Julian Assange were here, we would know far more about the crimes being committed in the world by our governments. And amongst those, perhaps the greatest of those, certainly for 20 years, the greatest of those, is the fact that we are up to our neck in the slaughter in the Palestinian territory of the Gaza Strip. KeirStarmer not only whipped his members of parliament to vote against a ceasefire, he not only stated and repeatedly, and his factotums on his front bench echoed his words later that day and the next day, that Israel had the right to cut off water and electricity from 2.3 million captives in the world's biggest open-air prison camp, to use the words of Britain's Foreign Secretary David Cameron, uttered in Turkey more than a decade ago when he was Prime Minister. When KeirStarmer must have known, unless he's not really a human rights lawyer, unless he's not really a King's Counsel, must have known that Israel had no such right, that in fact such collective punishment is a breach of multiple international law, the laws of war, the Nuremberg tribunals, the Geneva Conventions, international human rights law, all outlaw collective punishment of 2.3 million people by plunging them into the morass of war, famine, pestilence, and disease, the four horsemen of the apocalypse. But say it, he did, and he meant it, because when he told us that he supports Israel, quote, without qualification, unquote, he meant it. He didn't always mean it. I was present in a room in London only 9 years ago when he was on the platform calling for Israel to be kicked out of international football for racism. But 9 years later, he was certain that without qualification, he supported Israel. And everything that has flowed in British politics ever since has been predicated upon that without qualification support. He has used it ruthlessly to extirpate both his predecessor as Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, and many of his most important allies, and hundreds, if not thousands, of Labour Party members who've been suspended and expelled for breaches of KeirStarmer's without qualification support for Israel. And a grossly disproportionate number of those members of the Labour Party who've been expelled and suspended have been Jewish members of the Labour Party. Jews don't have to be on the side of apartheid. As I've often explained, during my time underground for the African National Congress led by Nelson Mandela in apartheid South Africa, all of the people who helped me as I moved around underground were South African Jews. Some of the great heroes of the anti-apartheid struggle, both inside South Africa and outside, were Jewish people who couldn't stomach apartheid. So everything that's happened inside the Labour Party is based on that statement of unequivocal, without qualification, fealty, loyalty of the leader of the opposition to the apartheid state of Israel. And it's coming back to haunt them. It's coming back to haunt them here in Rochdale. It's going to haunt them in Manchester Tameside. It's going to haunt them in the Bury constituency. It's going to haunt them in Oldham, in Bolton, and in Birmingham, and in East London, and in scores of constituencies all over this country. He may think that all these people are fools. He may think that by going to the rostrum at the LabourParty conference in Scotland today and finally saying there must be an immediate ceasefire, having kicked people off his front bench a few weeks ago for voting for an immediate ceasefire, he may think that these people are fools. But it's too little, Sir Keir, and it's way, way too late. And that's not a matter of chronology when I say it's too late. It's because 100,000 people are either dead or maimed or missing under the rubble in Gaza before you decided, finally, to call for a ceasefire and the end to the fighting in Gaza. It's actually 3 weeks since the International Court of Justice declared that plausibly Israel was committing acts of genocide and sent them for trial on that charge and issued peremptory instructions to the Israeli government, all of which they have defied. 3 weeks. Sir KeirStarmer, KC, has still not responded to the decision of the International Court of Justice. 100,000 people's blood is on the ground in Gaza before you decided to call for a ceasefire. And if you think, Sir Keir, that that is going to cut the mustard amongst the millions of people in this country who are deeply, vitally concerned with what's happening in Gaza. I met an old Englishman outside this studio here in Rochdale just before the show. He travelled quite some distance to shake hands with me and thank me for the 50 years of work that I have put in on this Palestine question, proving the personification of the lie that only Muslims care about what's happening in Gaza. Every Muslim cares, as you're going to find out, Mr. Starmer. But millions of others also care about children hanging on a hook with no legs and their life's blood drip, drip, dripping onto the concrete below. Millions of people care about little Hind, who was trapped in a car with her entire dead family, on the phone, saying her prayers, begging for rescue. And then Israel murdered her and the ambulance men that came to save her. If you think, KeirStarmer, that anyone's going to forget your role in this, if you think, KeirStarmer, that anyone's going to forgive your role in this, then you're not clever enough to be a King's Counsel. And you've been masquerading as a human rights lawyer all of this time. Julian Assange is the big story this week. But the slaughter, the genocide in Gaza City, in Khan Yunis, in Rafah, from Rochdale to Rafah, we reached out last night at an amazing event starring the great British rap artist, poet, philosopher, king, Low Key. We reached out from Rochdale to Rafah. We make no apology for it. We're proud of it. And I just want to close on this conundrum. Every single journalist and broadcaster who has covered the Rochdale by-election begins with a ritual denunciation of my having put the genocide in Gaza in the center of my election campaign. I started to ask the question, if this by-election had been taking place in 1940, in 1941, would these journalists and broadcasters be ritually attacking me for putting the Holocaust at the center of my election campaign? But by the time I reached the end of that question, believe it or not, maybe by divine countenance, I realized that the answer to that is actually yes. They would have. They did. These same newspapers denouncing me now were on the march with Britain's black shirts. Hurrah for the black shirts, screamed the headlines of Britain's Daily Mail back in the day. Those same newspapers, those same journalists didn't want to look at the Jews fleeing the Holocaust being conducted by the beasts of fascism. They closed their doors. They turned their backs. They looked the other way. Isn't it funny how some things never change? Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Many people today struggle with the common mainstream media consumer. These types of people are mindless zombies. Instead of living authentically, they feed off masking their true thoughts and feelings, doing nothing and criticizing those who actually do their research. This type of media consumer can be highly manipulative, so here are some golden standard clapbacks when they start with their propaganda. When they say you are too much for them, show them a mirror and tell them to look for less. Draw a diagram of where your business is and their business is, to visually show them they are in the wrong area. When they say, please watch this clip from this reputable BBC journalist, remind them that there are no longer any reputable BBC journalists, and to instead watch the mother of all talk shows for some real journalism. The next time you encounter a brainwashed zombie, hold your head high and know their obsession to eat your brain is masking their jealousy of your confidence, your freedom in self-expression, and most importantly, your authenticity. Keep listening to learn more on the mother of all talk shows.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
And it's live from Rochdale. Hashtag Tel Aviv Keith is still trending. Should joining the army of foreign governments be outlawed? Yes or no? It's a simple question, really. You can answer it on my Telegram. That's t.me/George Galloway, on my Twitter, and on the YouTube community poll, and on the YouTube stream. If you're watching on the YouTube stream, please share with all of your colleagues, all of your contacts, all of your followers, your friends. Ditto if you're watching on Facebook or on any platform that allows you to share the content of this, the mother of all talk shows. 17,000 people have already voted in this poll, and I've only just announced it, and I want it to be the biggest poll possible, so please cast your vote before the end of the show. If you want to comment on anything that I have said or should have said, if you're in the US or Canada, the toll-free number is +1 844 944 3344. If you're in the UK or Ireland, again, free of charge, It's 08081 965522. If you're in the rest of the world, it's 44203 966 2625. Now, Dr. Yasser Khan is, in fact, a Canadian surgeon. He's a humanitarian, and he's the founder and the CEO of the non-government organization GIVE. And even more importantly than all of that, he bears first-hand testimony and witness to the agony of the people in Gaza. Dr. Khan, thank you for joining us on the Mother of All talk shows. Perhaps you'll explain why you ended up in Gaza and what you found there.
Well, thanks for having me, George. Great to be on the Mother of All talk shows. I was one of the first missions from the Canada and US to actually go down. This was in December, and it was a random ask by a colleague of mine if I want to go, and I didn't think people were going at that point in time. And so I said yes immediately. I've been a lifetime humanitarian. I've been to over 40 different countries, worked in a lot of conflict and post-conflict zones in Asia, Africa, and South America. And basically, I said yes right away. We've all been seeing this live stream mass killing, plausible genocide, whatever you want to call it, genocide of a civilian population for 3 months at that point in time. And we're all suffering. I wanted to go and help, and that's what took me to Gaza.
And where did you go? How did you get in, first of all? And where did you go, and what did you find there?
So basically, I went through Cairo because that's the only way you can go. And I traversed the Sinai Desert and went through what's called the Rafah border, which is controlled by Egypt. And in order to get into Gaza, you have to be approved by all the authorities, the Egyptian authorities, the Israeli authorities, Ministry of Health, and the WHO. And I got in, and we landed at we got through the border at about 6:30 p.m., went through this harrowing night journey where I was the only car on the road, worried about Israel missile strikes, and we got to the European hospital, which is now the only functioning hospital in the Gaza Strip. At that point in time, there was Nasser Hospital, which is gone now, and the European hospital. And I mean, it was horrific what I saw. It was the most, in seeing so much in my life, it was the most horrific thing that I've ever seen in my entire life. And I don't want to ever see that again. I don't think anybody should see that. First of all, the whole hospital was turned into a refugee camp. There was 20,000 at that time. So everything I tell you, George, is now 10 times worse, right? Everything. I was about 4 weeks ago. So it's much worse. At that point in time, there's 20,000 people homeless, living in these makeshift shelters of bed sheets and blankets covering them up. There was no tents because they thought relatively, the hospital is the safest place to be. But as we've seen in this war on Gaza and the Palestinians, that nothing is safe. No international war crime is safe. There's no red line for the Israeli forces. We've seen that clearly. And so, fair enough. As soon as I got out, there was a 24-hour noise of drones humming. There are Israeli spy drones, but there's also quadcopter drones, which are the drones that are weaponized with missile or sniper fire. And there was constant humming. And right away, I noticed the bombs going. At that point in time, they were about 1 kilometer away from the hospital. Now, of course, they're right there. And you could hear the bombs and your whole body would shake. And the ER docs told me, they said, listen, Dr. Khan, you know what? Give it 10, 15 minutes, the mass casualties will start coming in. And boy, indeed, they did come in, George. And it was the most horrific scene that I've ever seen in my entire life. It was annihilation. It was mass chaos. I don't know if anybody can properly picture. It was mass chaos. There's people coming in with rubble, women, mothers holding their children. This one mother was holding her 8-9-year-old boy, who, by the way, is skinny, like there's bones, because as you know, they've been starved. I mean, they're starving now, and they've been starved intentionally by the Israeli forces, by the Israeli government. And they're starving, and they're all thin, and she's holding his cold, dead body, screaming to us to check her pulse, check his pulse, and the boy is cold and dead. And that's just one example. I mean, there's more than, I'd say about 60% of the people that I saw were all children, and all young children under 13 or 14. I mean, not that, I mean, even a 17-year-old is young, but under 13 or 14, covered with rubble, dust, head fractures. I mean, I hate to be graphic, but this is how it is, and what we should know. Limbs dangling off, barely connected, soft tissue wounds right to the bone, and eyeballs. Now, I do plastic eye surgery, eyeballs shattered with shrapnel kind of extruding. And you saw all this in front of me. It was mass chaos. There was no space because it's already 300% over capacity. There's no gauze. Staff are overworked. There's children and women all over the floor. Basically, they had to suture whatever they could on the ground, on the floor, without anesthetic, because the local anesthetics are short supply. Trying to triage who goes up, who doesn't go up. Head trauma in 2-year-olds with sort of a bump filled with blood there, and just lying on the floor, forgotten in the mass chaos. And it was just horrific. I always call it was like hell on earth, in my opinion.
Well, that was stunningly described, and especially with your caveat that everything you saw is now 10 times worse. You can certainly multiply the numbers and multiply the numbers of casualties. How badly off was the hospital then in terms of the facilities that it had, given that people are fleeing to hospital even when they're not injured because naively they imagine that a hospital will not be bombed? But of course, as you put it, the European hospital is the last remaining functioning hospital. How badly off are they for medicines, bandages, all the necessary paraphernalia for healthcare?
George, it was very bad when I was there. Gauze and antibiotics were minimally there, almost out. Even anesthetics, they had enough to give general anesthesia for now when I was there, but basically not enough for local anesthetic. On my last day when I was leaving, they ran out of morphine. Now, morphine is needed for a lot of major orthopedic procedures and injuries. You need morphine because it's a potent painkiller. They had none of that. I saw, George, people lying all over the floor in the hospital because there's no beds, with these orthopedic devices sticking from their legs. They're in unsterile situations. There's one bathroom for 200 people. They're living in closed corners, and their legs are getting infected. So basically, if the initial explosion or sniper fire did not get an amputation, basically the infection would do it, and they'd have to go back to the OR to save their life, would get an amputation. And if they had the proper equipment, proper surgical equipment, surgical instruments, proper supplies, and even anesthetics and antibiotics, you could save a lot of these limbs, right? In one day, I saw 15 legs being amputated. Almost all of them were under 16 years of age. So 14. I myself took about 10 shattered eyeballs out because of shrapnel. And the oldest child I did was 16 years old. I did as young as 2 to 6 to 11 to 12 to 15 or thereabouts. All young, all with their lives ruined. And I think the thing that we should understand from a healthcare point of view, it's been a completely intentional destruction of the healthcare system, and it's been done with a plan, right? And based on my discussions and my experience with speaking to physicians on the ground, the healthcare officials, the WHO, I was able to end what I saw myself, get a picture where basically they've destroyed most hospitals. Doctors have tried to repopulate the hospitals, and they've been driven out by sniper fire or killed. They've, the 2,000-pound weapons of mass destruction that the Israeli forces have dropped don't get the tunnels, but they'll get all infrastructure, so sewage pipes, water pipes. You get sewage water mixing with drinking water. Bacterial diseases are rampant. Cholera, typhoid, not far away. Hepatitis A is endemic. Gastrointestinal diseases. And then don't forget, there's 15,000 bodies decomposing under the rubble. Now it's raining there. That rainwater leaches bacteria, mixes with the water supply. You get further epidemics. And The bizarre thing, and you know this, George, the bizarre thing is their politicians have said this openly. They've not hidden any of their plans. They've said that they want epidemics. They've said to wipe everything out, which is really bizarre because it's not like I'm making this up. I mean, they've said this, and they've, over 300 to 400 healthcare workers have been killed: doctors, nurses, paramedics, ambulances, and so doctors have been kidnapped, right? And furthermore, antibiotics have been limited. So disease is rampant. They're starving. So they're malnourished, which means that they're more susceptible to infections and disease. And basically, it's been so where everything's flattened so that once this is all over, there'll be nothing to return back to. So they'll have to leave to seek healthcare. And that's been the plan from what I believe and from what I've talked to people on the ground, because they've destroyed everything and it makes no sense. It takes years to build a full functioning modern hospital, but seconds to destroy it, right? And so it's and I mean the amount of amputations, George, there's well over 5,000, I'd say. I mean, UNICEF 6 weeks ago said 1,000 approximately or more. There's at least 5,000 children, double amputees, 2 legs, 2 arms, 1 arm, 1 leg, who've been amputated. And the specialists say it takes, by the time a child is an adult, it takes 8 or 9 or 12 surgeries to refine the stump, as they grow older. And especially, how is that going to happen? Because most of these kids have lost their parents, their support system, their grandfathers, grandmothers, uncles, aunts. Everybody's gone. So who's going to take care of these kids? So again, the thinking is that, what? If the bombs don't get you, disease will get you. And so it's an awful, awful, horrific scenario, George. Really, really horrific. And getting worse.
Well, I'm almost speechless, Doctor. I'm almost speechless at the testimony that you're giving us. Your government and my government, and above all the United States government, but all the Western governments, to an enormous extent, whether it's greater or lesser, it's still enormous, deny all of this. For they could not accept it, they could not acknowledge it, because how could they then justify the political stance that they are taking? How is the testimony that you have brought back playing in Canada, once one of the kinder, gentler countries on the earth? No more, but once upon a time. How is it going down in Canada?
Well, unfortunately, the stance of our Prime Minister Trudeau currently has been extremely disappointing to all of us who are on the side of humanity. Having said that, I was one of the first groups to go in, and when I came back at that point in time, a lot of the mainstream media in Canada wanted to speak to me. So I did speak on mainstream media at the time. But now, George, if you look back, all these physicians are coming back in the UK, in the US, in Canada, and most of these people I don't know. We all have the same things to say. I mean, I was reading columns written now by physicians who just come back. It's the exact same thing I'm saying. We all have the same story because we're all witnessing, and this is hundreds of doctors now, the same thing, the same cruelty, the same mass killing. I mean, the Israeli killing machine has been vicious. I mean, George, when I was there, I was talking to my colleagues and doctors, and they said that they've seen injuries that they've never seen before, ever. They've seen missiles explode, filled with shrapnel intended to do permanent harm, so that, any of these kids, if they survive, they'll survive handicapped, right? I've seen them use drones that cause weird amputations. Most amputations occur at the elbow or at the knee. These are above thigh, above arm amputations. And so the thinking is that, Israel, with its defense industry, if a weapon is what they discussed with me, if a weapon is battle tested, it's gonna have a higher value, isn't it? Right? So it all adds up to this diabolic plan that they're doing. And again, the bizarre thing, George, is they haven't hidden it. Like the ICJ said these statements in their final hearing. I mean, these are things that are not hidden. For me, the humanitarian and medical trauma is huge. It's huge. And just it's been frustrating, yeah. And right now, I think the mainstream media is somewhat coming on now after 5 months of carnage and slaughter. They're coming on now, but we've been seeing the same thing all over again. We've all witnessed the same thing. All of us physicians who've come back.
Battle tested on babies. Doctor, you're doing God's work. May God bless you and reward you in the ever after. You've moved me so powerfully, I barely know what to say in response to what you've told us. Beyond thank you for joining us on the mother of all talk shows this evening, Dr. Yasser Khan, Canadian surgeon, professor, and founder of Give. Let me take a quick break while I recover my composure, and I'll be right back. Let me say that you can listen to the audio-only version of MOATS on our MOATS podcast, and the numbers on that are going through the roof. Just search MOATS with George Galloway on Apple, Spotify, Google, or whichever platform you listen to your podcasts on. In recent weeks, it's been the #1 political podcast in Benin, Jordan, the Gambia, Qatar, Jamaica, Ghana, Iceland, Malaysia, Singapore, Sweden, and the Philippines. #1 political podcast in all those countries. Truly, truly phenomenal. Do you know that BBC News has lost 40% of its audience in the last 2 years? It's official. And of course, that is the sensible thing to do. But to get people to tune in and change course and listen to a radically different point of view is even more difficult. But it's happening. And the numbers that we are racking up are now in their millions.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
How about that podcast then? #1 in Pakistan and the United Arab Emirates, and in the charts just about everywhere in the world. Do scan that, what do they call them? Q codes or something? QR codes. It's all over my head. I just do the talking. Clever younger people do the science. So let's go to the calls. Raja is on the line from Berlin about Julian Assange. Raja, welcome to the show, ma'am.
Hello. Thank you.
Yes, welcome.
Yeah, so I want to talk about Julian Assange. I think the audience already know about Julian Assange, but I'm always not sure because I make so many times the experience that people are not informed or not well informed. And I want to explain briefly why I'm so concerned about this case and why it's very, very actual. So I will fly tomorrow to London to demonstrate there.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So,
okay. Yes, good. You're welcome. Most welcome.
Yeah, thank you. So Julian Assange is in the Belmarsh prison in London right now and threatened with extradition to the United States because they accuse him with the Espionage Act. And on Tuesday and Wednesday, he might have his last hearing against this extradition. And this is why everyone should demonstrate there who can come there. And you find all the information on freeassange.org. And I will fly from Berlin to demonstrate there. And I think it's very important for all of us because it's a huge attack on press freedom and human rights worldwide. Because Julian Assange is only accused by the United States for his publications of war crimes and torture. And it's really about nothing else. It's only about his publications. And it's the first time in history that the Espionage Act is used against a publisher. And yeah, I think this is what everyone should know about this case. And because it's so actual right now, I want everyone to inform himself about this and to know about this. And If you can't make it to demonstrate with me and other supporters together, then just talk about it. I think it's very important.
Thank you, Raja. In Berlin, Julian Assange was the subject of the first part of my monologue this evening, so the viewers are long and well sensitized to it. But it's good that you mentioned Tuesday and Wednesday, 20 and 21 of February, so that people can be there in the Strand from early morning until the verdict of the court, until the conclusion of the court case. Little Maisie says Julian Assange must be released. If there's any morality left in our law system, Assange has to be released to be with his family. He played such a vital role in informing us of war crimes. And EM says, next the CIA will be coming for Lula. Lula isn't ill or suicidal. He's brilliantly called out the genocide. Line 2, Ehab is in Detroit, Michigan. Go ahead, Ehab.
Yeah, hi, George, and thank you for having me. And first off, I would like to say also thank you to Dr. Yasser Khan for his, God bless him for his work.
Stunning testimony that was.
Unfortunately, we are all quite familiar with the testimony, and that's why I'm calling. Familiar in terms, I personally have experienced what it is to be occupied by Israel. From the age of 3, from 1973, I can remember I was probably 4 or 5 years old. I can remember the jets flying over southern Lebanon. And I can remember clearly, as if in a movie, my younger brother, running to hide under the chair on which my grandmom sat. Move forward to past 1970, Israel had free access to southern Lebanon. They would come in and grab whoever they want at night or during the daylight, take them, interrogate them, whip the hell out of them. And then some disappeared forever, some were released. And then when Israel officially occupied Lebanon from 1978, 1980, 1978, by the way, I was 9 years old. I saw the first reconnaissance tanks and jeeps that entered Lebanon through southern Lebanon. And as kids, me and my 2 brothers, we were terrified, and we got pretty much frozen in place. We were petrified. After that, 1980 onwards, Israel imposed, it's called the security zone, and it went as far as 40 miles inside Lebanon. They created their own puppet army, and one of the craziest things that is a common share with the Palestinians nowadays is that if you wanted to, if I as an individual wanted to leave the Israeli-controlled a part of Lebanon to go into the other part of Lebanon, which was not under Israeli, we had to have a permission, what you call it, a permit.
A permit.
To leave.
A permit.
A permit to leave South Lebanon to go into Lebanon proper, into the other part of Lebanon. And then when you come back, God help you, the interrogation you have to go through at the hands of its puppet army of southern Lebanon. That's just imagine. In between from 1979, I actually lived in Africa, and so I went back to Lebanon in 1996, and I went and I told my aunt. By that time, my dad was dead. I told my aunt I wanted to go back to where my dad was born and where I grew up. And she goes yeah, go there. They will find you like a good experiment. What they will do with you is they will take you, conscript you, force you to hold arms, and you'll be fighting in no time against your own people. And
a miserable,
that was my
miserable time, Ehab, I of course know your story very well. I've been to the Khayyam prison where they incarcerated and tortured people. But the resistance in Lebanon drove them out of most, but not all, of occupied Lebanon at the beginning of this century, since when that resistance has become enormously powerful and increasingly influential, and I believe impregnable to further Israeli occupation. It's no accident that the Israeli forces have huffed and puffed and talked about invading Lebanon again, occupying it again, driving the resistance back beyond the Litani River, but they have not even attempted to do so. Because while the resistance may have been relatively poorly armed in 2000 and in 2006, it's the very opposite of poorly armed and organized now. Thank you for that call. Ange says, I hope Dr. Yasser Khan is providing a witness statement for South Africa's genocide case. What a wonderful human being he is. Thank you for doing everything you could to help those poor people. And I may say, Dr. Khan, that is the opinion of hundreds of people now writing to us. One of the most powerful interviews I have ever conducted. DW says, I started using the term Collective Fred West for Collective West as an homage to all the child killing they are enabling. The legend, Professor Simon in Florida, is on next about the Munich Security Conference, which assumed an unusually high salience in the news over the last 48 hours. Simon, welcome back.
Greetings to you, Mr. Galloway, and to your worldwide audience. Well, we just, in the last few hours, had the conclusion of the 60th anniversary Munich Security Conference, at which your opponents, if not nemesis, Mr. Starmer and his sidekick, Mr. Lamy, were in attendance, as they were at Davos and at the Bilderberg previously, making their necessary connections, they hope. And one wishes that you may be able to put a stop to the fruition of some of those connections, given the people they've been consorting with. But getting back to the subject of detail, they obviously were focused on Ukraine, and very much there was attention given and a large number of Arab representatives who, quite astonishingly, were there alongside both the President of Israel, who your audience no doubt will recall was directly quoted in the judgment of the International Court of Justice when they came to the conclusion that there was plausible evidence of genocide. That man, obviously with no shame whatsoever, was in attendance, and so was his wife, to talk about violence against women, followed then by the new Israeli foreign minister, who went so far as to announce that the war would not end and that victory would come to them no matter what the price. And apparently it's the poor people of Palestine who will be paying that price, since the Israelis won't even be paying a financial price, as it would appear shortly billions of dollars will be compensating them for their dastardly deeds coming from the United States. But it looks like a consequence of that bill, or their desperate rush to try and fund for a third time a temporary measure to keep the US federal government from grinding to a halt, as they still haven't passed a full budget for this fiscal year, may bring about the overthrow of the Speaker of the US House of Representatives yet again. There indeed seem to be three possible paths to that outcome, as described this weekend by the chair of the House of Representatives Foreign Affairs Committee. But in Munich, there was another sideshow going on, as Zelensky of Ukraine not only addressed the assaulted groups, but dashed from Munich to Berlin with a jet fighter escort, then from Berlin to Paris to meet with President Macron of France, in each capital signing the respective European versions of the 10-year British-Ukraine security agreement. No announcement yet whether or not that will indeed take the form of a 100-year alliance, or possibly, in the case of Germany, some kind of 1,000-year relationship, without saying any more.
1,000 years is a metric they like in Germany. The 1,000-year Reich springs to mind.
I couldn't possibly comment. And so next week, as everyone travels home, we see the ICJ obviously beginning to start its hearing on the case that actually dates all the way back to December of 2022, when the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories and the legality or otherwise of that was referred to it by the United Nations General Assembly. And indeed, it's now gone from a one-day hearing to up to 6 or 7 days of hearings, because 52 countries have been given permission to testify against Israel, alongside 6 international organizations. And whilst that is underway, the United Nations Security Council will be meeting to vote on the umpteenth ceasefire resolution, this one proposed by Algeria, after over 2 weeks of delays, because the United States said that it would threaten the status of sensitive hostage negotiations that apparently didn't include the 7,000 Palestinians who have been taken hostage by the Israeli occupation forces from their homes in the West Bank in the last 4 months. Heaven knows what will happen to those people, who I'm sure their families are equally keen to be reunited with them. But the United States, unfortunately, this weekend is persisting in their threat to veto yet again that sensible and reasonable ceasefire proposal from Algeria, acting on behalf of the Arab League with its solitary seat on the United Nations Security Council, despite the fact that the Prime Minister of Israel refused to even allow the head of Shin Bet and Mossad to return to Cairo to continue the negotiations on Thursday, and they completely and totally halted. So there are no sensitive negotiations going on. And indeed, yesterday, that same gentleman in Israel announced live on television that even if all of those Israeli citizens held in Gaza, despite some of them being unequivocally uniformed prisoners of war, captured under arms, that they would still continue with their operation into Rafah. So the United States has no excuse whatsoever to at least abstain and allow the motion to pass through. But unfortunately, we all fear that we're going to see yet another ignominious veto occur on Tuesday afternoon.
Again, a wonderful tour of the horizon, this time of the Munich Security Conference and the United Nations Security Council, from our resident professor and legend, Simon, in Florida. Fiaz is on the line in London on Julian Assange. Go ahead, Fiaz.
Hi there, George. Just wanted to, as I'm pretty sure we've all known, the case of Julian Assange's final decision at the High Court is appearing. As I'm pretty sure you know, and everyone else watching knows, the Western establishment, especially in the media and the political class, have once again shown their blatant hypocrisy in making a selective outrage drama for the apparent death of Alexei Navalny in a Russian prison. I wish I didn't, but I couldn't help but laugh at this show of outrage, considering the fact that in the case of Julian Assange and Gonzalo Lira, it was complete it was complete silence. And I even spoke to a lot of people about this and asked where was all this hysteria when it came to people who are actually reporting the information that we as a public have the right to know.
Well, of course, hypocrisy is our middle name, Fiaz. Democracy, shamocracy, it's all just lipstick on a pig, and what a pig it really is. Let's take a quick break, and then it's the one and only Garland Nixon from the United States. Stay tuned.
A new dawn has broken, has it not?
He had that Clinton thing. His eyes were round and big and smiley, and he was very charming.
He became this incredible pop idol kind of prime minister.
I think most people who have dealt with me think I'm a pretty straight sort of guy, and I am.
New Labour was backed by the most powerful media interests because they realised he was representing them.
He was caught red-handed trading policy in return for hard cash from a businessman.
America has no truer friend than Great Britain.
Both Bush as well as Tony Blair are now wanting to plunge the world into a Holocaust.
JP Morgan paid him off for the Iraq war. The man is a war criminal.
Is Tony Blair a war criminal? In my opinion, yes.
Most definitely.
The pursuit of money has become the dominant theme in your life.
All these relationships are, in most people's estimation, corrupt relationships.
No previous Labour Prime Minister has behaved in this shameful, money-grubbing way.
How do you sleep at night? You know, it's that. It's as a person.
Two films, The Killings of Tony Blair and Killing Kelly, the strange death of Dr. David Kelly, the UN weapons inspector, mysteriously found in the worst case of suicide any of us have ever found, at least until the Jeffrey Epstein case. You get both of them free of charge if you sign up on my Patreon. It'll cost you less than the cost of a cup of tea in an insalubrious cafe every week. Imagine. For that money, you can support my work. I think that you should do it if you possibly can. It's on patreon.com/George Galloway. The poll is going well. Should joining the army of foreign governments be outlawed? Yes or no? You can vote on Telegram, on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, or on my Twitter, my X, or on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. Reminder of the phone numbers again, although the phones are ringing off the hook apparently. US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. UK and Ireland, 0808 196 5522. And the worldwide number, 44203 966 2625. One of our most popular guests from the United States is the one and only Garland Nixon, talk show host and political analyst, who joins us again now. Garland, welcome back. I'd have you on every week if I could. You are such a popular guest and such a wise one. So I want to ask right up front about Julian Assange. He might be on the plane to you this week, this very week. He might be from the court to the airport and out of here. What's going to happen if and when he arrives in the United States?
Well, I still kind of feel as though the plan may be to allow him to go before some type of a European court or to continue to stretch this thing out, because as you bring up, there are going to be major problems if they bring Julian Assange here. It's going to put the mainstream media here in a difficult position, wherein it will be made obvious that they are acting theoretically acting against their own best interest. Many of the mainstream media outlets that have remained quiet during the persecution of Julian Assange could, in fact, be charged with the same crimes that he's charged with, and that they shared the same information that he shared. So as if the Biden administration didn't have enough problems, if they bring Julian Assange here to the United States, they'll probably face some very significant questions. And I would likely think there will be some protests.
Yeah, I mean, that was the point I was going to make to you next. That, I mean, Joe Biden needs this like a hole in the head, right? I mean, the liberals that are his last remaining constituency of support, including the liberal newspapers, the Post, the Times, and so on, they cannot possibly support the prosecution of Julian Assange under the Espionage Act because they actually published his material. And so one would have thought that Biden would have dropped this case by now. Why hasn't he?
This is not a Joe Biden case. This is, in fact, the deep state, or some people just call it the state. This is the eternal state, the people who are always in power. They're upset about it, and they would be perfectly happy if, they're fine if Joe Biden, suffers, if either of the parties suffer, because they're still going to be in power. I think one of the things we're looking at here is that it would be interesting in this particular time period because the Ukraine project, which is a neocon project, is in collapse with what's happening in Avdiivka. I always struggle with that term. The Human Rights Project, which is to go around the world and to claim, that we have the moral high ground all of the time, that's falling apart with the Alexei Navalny death, because as the U.S. screams, "Oh my gosh, poor Navalny," of course, people obviously say, you're literally involved in a genocide. How can you possibly argue that someone else is involved in some kind of, a crime of moral turpitude based on what you're doing? And last but not least, certainly the issue of Julian Assange brings up the issue of democracy and of freedom of speech, freedom of the press that the U.S. again tries to use against their enemies. So it would be one more of their fake tropes collapsing in their face.
I was going to ask you about both Ukraine and Gaza. Let's start with Ukraine. The logjam over funding appears to be continuing, and according to one of our guests, Simon in Florida, it now imperils the current Speaker of the House as it imperiled the last one. What's happening on the Ukraine front in the United States?
Well, I think it would have been difficult enough to get funding through prior to everything that's happened in the last several weeks. But I think that two things. Number one, the fact that it is now clear and obvious that there is no universe in which Ukraine is going to defeat the Russian army makes it obvious that any money that's sunk into Ukraine now is, of course, throwing bad money. I would say bad money for good. Let's just say worse money for bad in this particular instance. Additionally, Donald Trump, I think, realizes that this thing's going to collapse. And the Republicans realize that this thing's going to collapse. And I think they realize they'd much prefer it collapse now than after the election. And so it's going to be, I think, nearly impossible to get any money through for the Ukraine project, in that it is in the process of collapsing right now. So I think that that game is over. They're probably going to try to figure out how they can survive the immediate demise of the Nazi regime in Kiev.
Well, of course, Donald Trump said he'd sort it out before he was even inaugurated, but the war might be over before your presidential election is even held. How much of an election issue is this turning out to be in the primaries and as we run towards November?
Well, I think that it has the fallout from the Ukraine debacle has not even begun to to hit American politics, because there's still some, because Ukraine has not completely collapsed. The American people, a large number of the American people, have not realized the gravity of the situation there. But as we see it completely collapse, they'll be in a position where the only option will be to begin some level of negotiations with the Russians, and to negotiate with the Russians acknowledges that the Russians are good faith actors, that they can be talked to. So the more evidence that comes out that the Russians, were willing to talk from the Tucker Carlson interview, and that now we're in a position where we can talk to the Russians, where we have to talk to the Russians. The whole trope that they were just crazy people who wanted to attack Ukraine and then move on to the English Channel is going to go out the window. And it just opens the door for more questions. I think the Biden administration's in deep and serious hurt. And I don't know if you saw the latest iteration of the Biden brain freeze, but it was so horrific as to create a dynamic where now Kamala Harris is out talking. And now they're saying Kamala Harris, there's all of this press that Kamala Harris is now working to save the campaign and to take them in a different direction. If Kamala Harris is your salvation, it's time to search for a white flag.
What's been the fallout of Tucker Carlson's global record-breaking interview? I don't know the latest figure. The last one I saw was over 200 million viewers. The most viewed political interview of all time by a country mile, by 1,000 country miles. What's the fallout in the U.S. over it?
I think the biggest fallout is probably in Congress, because there were a lot of people out here who watch alternative media, and they already understood what was going on there. However, I think now the pressure from that element of the Republican Party that was opposing for this this neocon project in Ukraine, that element is growing due to this, and they've got more information. I think the people who are opposing continuing with the neocon project now have much more ammunition to argue against it, that now that has created a group of Republicans in the House that are large enough and strong enough that they can block it. That now I don't see how anything that just finished it off. Now they have the horsepower that they need in Congress to ensure that no more money gets thrown away in the Ukraine trash compactor.
Now, Joe Biden has just announced that he's going to veto the latest, fourth, I think it is, attempt to order a ceasefire from the Security Council in New York. This is the Algerian motion that we talked about on the show earlier. Why did he do that? I mean, why not just abstain? He's always telling us, after all, that he's increasingly unhappy about the unhinged behavior of your country's Israeli ally.
Well, it's fairly obvious now that Joe Biden will go along with Bibi Netanyahu, whatever he wants, no matter how disastrous the policies. The history of Joe Biden, if you look at what he has said regarding Israel and Zionism, it is very clear that Joe Biden has always intended on supporting the most extreme elements in the Israeli government, and that while he may, occasionally they'll leak something that Joe Biden was arguing with Benjamin Netanyahu, or he called him some kind of a name. Those little leaks come out for what they're worth. But the reality is, Joe Biden has made it clear that he's going to support Bibi Netanyahu to the end. I do think that the plan that the Zionist leadership in Israel has to attack Hezbollah will be in southern Lebanon will be their demise, because Lebanon is far too powerful for them to go toe to toe with it and not really get clobbered. And at that point, what does the United States do? Do they get involved when the American people do not want another war? So Joe Biden's backed himself and Bibi Netanyahu into a corner. And I can't predict how it will come out, but I do predict that Joe Biden will continue to support Bibi Netanyahu in his suicidal move to really to destroy Israel on his own.
And finally, Garland, please bring us up to date on the farcical primaries. Trump's already won. He had already won before he began. Is he formally the winner yet? And Joe Biden, having forced everyone else out of the race, has he managed to win against no opponents at all? And where stands Kennedy now in the polling?
Well, right now it is Joe Biden and Trump. That's pretty much it. It's a foregone conclusion. The Democrats, as you probably know, a number of states, they wouldn't even allow another name on the ballot other than Joe Biden. So they've made their decision to go with Biden. But again, we can see that Joe Biden does not have the mental capacity to continue. I mean, I don't even know if this guy's still going to be alive next November, and if he is, if he'll know he's alive. I think to be quite frank, the discussion about the Democratic Party is not so much about Joe Biden being the nominee, but how are they going to manage? What machinations will they use to insert someone else other than Joe Biden? Nikki Haley's an interesting because she's basically saying all the things that the Democrats would say. She's making the arguments that the neocon Democrats would make against Donald Trump. She's attacking him now for not being tough about the death of Alexei Navalny. And I think she's mainly sticking around, hoping that they'll be able to use lawfare to get rid of Donald Trump. And when Trump goes, because of whatever the latest case against him takes him out, that she'll be there to, as they say, you shake the tree and I'll rake the leaves. She's there to rake the leaves in the primaries. But right now, the main case that they wanted to use against Donald Trump in Georgia seems to be unfolding. The other case that they wanted to hurt him with in New York, where he ended up with interest about a $450 million judgment against him, that still has to go to the Supreme Court. And I personally think that the Supreme Court will significantly reduce that, but we shall see. So yeah, right now, to be on the ground in the United States, pretty much universally, everybody says, yeah, it looks like Trump's going to win it. I mean, you just talk to everybody and everybody says, yeah, Trump's going to win it. Only those who hope otherwise, they have their fingers and toes crossed. But in reality, barring some unthinkable black swan event, Donald Trump has this thing done.
Any word on his running mate?
No, the discussion now, there are some people saying, well, maybe Nikki Haley. Well, here's what I'd say. If Donald Trump chose Nikki Haley, he wouldn't live an hour. If the neocons knew that all they had to do was take Donald Trump out and Nikki Haley would become immediately president, he wouldn't live long enough to do the oath of office. But there's a lot of names floating around there. I personally believe myself, due to the fact that there's so many military engagements, my prediction is that Donald Trump will choose somebody with a military background. I don't know that it'll be McGregor or whoever, but I'm suspecting he will choose someone with a military background that will cement his argument that he can address the all of these international conflicts going on, and that he will have someone who understands them enough that he can navigate them to a close. So that's my prediction.
That's a smart piece of speculation. I hope it's Colonel McGregor. If it's not Scott Ritter, Garland Nixon, thank you very much for joining us. Now we're talking on the mother of all talk. So should joining the army of foreign governments be outlawed, yes or no? You've got about 20 minutes left to vote on that. James Gerard Brown says the only good Clinton is George Clinton, was doing the rounds a few years ago. How about this? The only good Nixon is Garland Nixon. How wonderful and absolutely true. Let's take a quick break, and then I want to talk to you again about the podcast.
The 1897 edition of War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, read by George Galloway, available only on Patreon.
The cylinder was artificial, hollow, with an end that screwed out. Something within the cylinder was unscrewing the top. Good heavens, said Ogilvy. There's a man in it, men in it, half roasted to death, trying to escape. At once, with a quick mental leap, he linked the thing with the flash on Mars. The thought of the confined creature was so dreadful to him that he forgot the heat and went forward to the cylinder to help turn. But luckily, the dull radiation arrested him before he could burn his hands on the still glowing metal.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, I want you to scan the QR code on your screen now. It will take you to wherever you get your podcasts from. On there, actually, are a backdated library of podcasts from the mother of all talk shows, archive episodes for you to enjoy. This podcast is breaking records all over the world. I told you earlier, it was last week the #1 political podcast in Pakistan and the #1 in the United Arab Emirates. It has previously been #1 in dozens of countries, and it's in the charts in virtually every country in the world where podcasts can be downloaded. So let's hope that you did that when I gave you the chance. Let's go back to the lines to New York, where Dennis wants to talk about anti-Zionism. Go ahead, Dennis.
Good day, George. Thank you for being there. I've been following your work for 20 years. It's indispensable.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So amidst all of the pain, suffering, depravity that we have all, we're all witnessing now, a couple of things. I'm looking for some hope, some glimmer of hope amidst all of this sickness and sadness and destruction. Not the least of which is the emotional fortitude that your guest, Dr. Khan, is an example of that. It's just so hopeful and inspiring and encouraging to witness the emotional fortitude of people like Dr. Khan, who actually are in the trenches and witness this depravity firsthand and still have the strength and the courage and the fortitude to kind of soldier on with that. Getting to my point, there's a group I have become aware of over the last several months of 3 men who refer to themselves as the new historians. They are Ilan Pape, Avi Sharleem, and Benny Morris, who are all elder, former Zionists who have together written a comprehensive history of Zionism dating from its inception back in the late 1800s, and whose work together, I think, for me, has given me the clearest comprehensive overview, unbiased, and coming from a place that really validates their anti-Zionist positions, all being former Zionists and Israeli. So their credibility is not to be disputed.
Unimpeachable, unimpeachable.
Unimpeachable is the word. So I'm just mentioning their names and that because they offered me, and I think will offer the world, access to some really clear, concise, comprehensive history of Zionism that will help us navigate this process of what is really the suicide, as Garland Nixon just referred to, of the State of Israel and the whole Zionist project. It just helps make it very, very clear how this whole process is working, and honestly gives me some hope that that all is not for naught, and that all is not lost. That's the first thing. One other quick note.
Well, you're right to be. Quickly. Yeah, go on, Dennis.
Go ahead. Oh, okay, no, respond, and then I'll just say one more thing.
I can't. No, so say the one more thing now.
Okay. The one more thing is that I'm glad that I didn't write Amy Goodman and Democracy Now! Off as being irrelevant or worse, because I think she's doing an invaluable job of getting to an audience that really needs to be informed. And I encourage your
I'll take your word for it, Dennis. I'm not a big fan of Democracy Now! And Amy Goodman, but I'll take your word for it. I haven't seen her recent work, and I'll take your word for it that she is doing a good job. I think you're right to have hope. In the words of the English poet Robert Browning, it will never be glad, confident morning again for Israel. Its reputation is comprehensively ruined amongst all right-thinking people and for all time. Only the worst people in the world are continuing to support Israel in the face of the evidence before our own eyes, on our own telephones, our own computer screens, and sadly, not often, on our own televisions, because that bubble, the mainstream media and political class bubble, toxic though it is just a bubble. And we intend to burst that bubble, and are on our way to doing so, at least here in the United Kingdom. But the truth is, Israel will never recover from this, and the day will come, and not far distant, when the supporters of Zionism will be ashamed to recall, and certainly to recount, the ways in which they helped this genocide to unfold, how they defended it, how they armed it, funded it, and proselytized for it. That day is coming very soon, Dennis. Thank you for an excellent call from New York. Stanley Beckett says, "This is the greatest crime against humanity in the Northern Hemisphere. Cambodia and Rwanda were worse in numbers since the Holocaust. I never thought I would see such atrocities." Okay, back to the lines. Sophia is in Virginia on censorship. Sophia, welcome to the show.
Hey, Galloway, Mr. Galloway, thank you so much. I'm a fan of yours. Now, I live in the U.S., but I also produce content for Chinese social media. And I have different shows there. Now, I do find that the Western audience, including yours, probably need to understand why China censors. So I just want to use this opportunity to talk about that. Now, my own program sometimes get censored. Yeah, so my own programs sometimes do get censored, but the reason is actually if there is no government control, the Chinese media would be just like the Western media. And the Western corporations, they will try to get into the Chinese market. And then the Chinese media will be just like the Western mainstream media. There will be lies, there'll be smears, and they will try to divide people, and they will certainly lie about the Chinese government, etc. I mean, is that really what the China needs? So it's simply about country sovereignty. It's no different than physical border. I think that's something that not many people understand. That when people are thinking about Chinese censorship, it's like, okay, the Chinese government trying to control the message and, just push their own narrative. That is not the case. The Chinese social media actually is very active. There are a lot of interesting discussions, including my own audience. I do learn a lot from them. But there are certainly, certain lines. And in general, I do think the Chinese government want the Chinese companies to be dominant there, and not like other outside Western media companies to come into China and take over the media, take over the airspace. That's really is one of the most important reasons that they censor, if that makes sense.
Well, thanks, Sophia. It's not really the subject for tonight, but your points have been well made and no doubt noted. I'm cutting you short only because I literally have a record number of callers tonight. Some 350 people have called the show to be on, amongst whom is Tony in Worcestershire on Palestine. Go ahead, Tony.
Hi, George, and good evening again. It's so good to be speaking to you again. I offer my best wishes to you and your family, and to all those who were putting MOATS together.
Thank you.
MOATS, George, continues to be a rich tapestry of education and information on subject matters important to all of us. You are to be congratulated over your persistent stance and support for the Palestinian people, and you're focusing on them over the last 4 months or so. You're to be congratulated for. What the ruling at The Hague did for me was to further expose what a pathetic excuse for a politician our current Prime Minister is. Given the withdrawal of aid and his response to civilians holding white flags being murdered. Not, of course, to be outdone by the leader of an excuse for a Labour Party. You've said a lot about that in your monologue, George, so I won't prolong on that, but what I would want to say is, what a heart-wrenching interview with Dr. Khan, and I think how thankful and grateful we have to be for his skills and for his courage in going to such an area and to be working with people under such conditions. Thank you, Dr.
Amen,
Khan.
amen, amen. Thank you, Tony. God bless you for your kind words. I was actually almost speechless at the interview with Dr. Yasser Khan. I hope it travels far and forever. Dean is on the line from Arizona on South Africa. I told you, this is the global university of the airwaves. On you go, Dean.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. I'm a big fan of your work and your program. I recently listened to the powerful and inspiring speech presented by Julius Malema of the Economic Freedom Fighters in South Africa. More recently, yesterday or the day before, I listened to his press conference where he expressed his frustration that the government of South Africa is not doing enough for the Palestinian people. He rather emphatically criticized President Ramaphosa and the ICJ. Can you enlighten us at all on this matter?
I didn't hear the speech, and it strikes me as obviously unfair because South Africa has done more than any country in the whole world to try and come to the aid of the Palestinians on the international level. The South African government, led by Cyril Ramaphosa, a former comrade of mine, have been the best government in the world. So whilst no doubt they might have done more, no doubt Malema would have liked them to do more, when you've done more than anybody else in the world, it must strike one as rather churlish to be attacking the ANC. I have many things to criticize the ANC about as a former soldier of theirs, but the attitude to Palestine would not be one of them. And our previous guest a few weeks ago, my comrade Ronnie Casrills, former minister in the ANC government, he's in exactly the same place as me, with the same criticisms of the ANC as me. But the one thing you can't criticize them for is Palestine, where they have blazed a trail that 56 other countries have now joined the South African case, but there would be no case to join if it weren't for South Africa. Having said all of that, and I'm not really across the South African elections, I'm rather preoccupied but with other elections at the moment. I think that Malema is, well, let me just put it this way. People say I'm a good speaker. Even my enemies concede that. But the best speech, the best outdoor speech I have ever heard was Malema's eulogy at the funeral of the late Winnie Mandela. As a piece of oratory, I have never heard anything like it. And it's available on YouTube. I refer everyone to it. It's the best speech outdoors I have ever heard. And so I don't mean to disrespect him or the EFF, who are doing well in the polls because they are focusing on the things that the ANC government rightly should be criticized for. Coming up in a few minutes is my good wife Gayatri with the social media review. But first, on line one, the legend, Tommy in Glasgow. Go on yourself, Tom.
Assalamu alaikum, brother. How you doing?
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. All good, thank you.
Alhamdulillah. I can. It was beautiful. It's triggered a wee bit of PTSD in me. You know, what you see, you can't unsee. What you hear, you can't unhear. I don't know how other people are coping, but it's very hard to cope. I had a good friend who had part of my leg taken off. If you recall the short song of Shane McGowan, Waltzing Matilda, and part of it he says, you know, there's better off things. Never thought there's worse things than dying and having a part of my leg and having that happening. Yes, I'm distraught as always, George. I just want to offer my help. I said to the person on the phone there, Jay, lovely people you've got, what a show, to get assistance to do the telephone campaign. I'll let other people go on, George, because God bless. I just want to leave.
God bless you, Tom.
Just have to say
God
one
bless
thing.
You. I can hear the distress in your voice because I know you to be a man of God. I know that this has all touched you and broken your heart, but it hasn't broken your spirit.
Never.
And that is the key message. We all of us, we would not be human if all of the last 4 months had not shredded our hearts and our emotions. And it's right that it should be so, but it must not dim our determination and our spirit. If the Palestinian people can go on and on, then so must we. Tommy, thank you in Glasgow. Gayatri is now live from Rochdale with the social media roundup. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Let's start off with the poll. Interesting arguments are being brought forth, making it not such a straightforward a question, actually. Should joining the army of foreign governments be outlawed? On Patreon, Graham Briggs White says, I am saying yes, but there are reasons whereto it does not apply, like in the Spanish Civil War. So it is not that cut and dried. Gerald Randall says, generally, I would vote yes, but to outlaw fighting for a foreign government entirely would preclude people from fighting for a government that is being attacked from outside and having rebellion fomented in its countries, such as Syria, for example. And City Guy USA says border areas may be convinced to join either cause, but also people with money will most likely have a bigger military, which isn't fair fighting.
Well, I've got to say I've got some sympathy for that argument, and I'm glad actually that it is beginning to be reflected in your social media basket. It's not really reflected in the poll itself, where the biggest number of no's is on Twitter. 15% say no, but it's 86%, 85, 88, 85 say yes. It should be outlawed. But it's an interesting question and an interesting set of answers. What else have you got?
Hi, George. When judging Assange, the US government should remember that it was Thomas Jefferson who said, "Freedom of information is the currency of our democracy." It's an email from Dave.
Well, that's good. I don't often have kind things to say about Thomas Jefferson, but if that's what he said, he was right.
Right. And then finally, as already clear, Dr. Khan, what a testimony, what a fantastic interview there was. I mean, fantastic might not be the greatest word because we were all shattered, of course. We were all trembling listening to his firsthand experience. Paul says, well done to Garland Nixon for placing his Yemeni flag in a prominent place. And Dr. Yasser's testimony was shattering. And another one from Lucy Henry says, Dr. Khan, factual, telling us the plight of Palestinians in Gaza, its crimes against humanity is heartbreaking, truly. I never imagined I witnessed such thing in my life. I don't watch History Channel now. I see it in real time. Isn't that true?
Yeah, I'm just I'm fantasizing for a moment about Dr. Khan appearing in front of the House of Commons, for example, and giving that testimony. How could anybody at all not be utterly devastated by that real life testimony from an eye surgeon from Canada? How is it possible that anyone could watch what he said tonight and not consider that not only is this a great crime being committed by Netanyahu, but equally big criminals are the Western governments, including his own and our own here in the United Kingdom, who have done everything they could to make it possible. And
yes,
I'm now flying blind, Gayatri, because I can no longer see you, but I'm glad I can hear you. Have you got anything else for me?
Oh, no, just that's interesting that you make that point about having him speak at the House of Commons. Maybe someone should invite him into the House of Commons.
Well, if I'm in a position to do so early next month, I promise you I definitely will do so. Which brings to mind, the last person I invited to speak at the House of Commons was Max Kaiser, the Bitcoin king, former television colleague of mine. He was talking on Bitcoin in the House of Commons. And that night, the price of a Bitcoin was $14.52. It's now $55,000. If you were at that meeting, I bet you wish you'd taken Max's advice. Thank you, Gayatri. I'll see you later. Hussein is on the line from Lebanon on Palestine. Go ahead, Hussein.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Galloway, and thank you for taking my call. I just would like to state that I have been a fan of yours since I saw your interview on Sky News in 2006, talking about the terrorist attack on south of Lebanon, and of course how rude was the anchor. Nothing to be surprised here. And also, when I saw your clip in, I think it was a talk in a campus, and when you realized the counterparty was Israeli, you said something that that's resounded with me, which is, I don't recognize your country. I don't discuss with you. And this is something we have in common with you, Mr. Galloway, because as a law here in Lebanon, we don't recognize that enemy. We don't recognize it as a state. And I just wanted to thank you for all your stance. And
well, on that point,
Hussein,
just 1 minute, I'll let you back in. I don't know if you or others are aware, but the person in question, Elon Levy, who I refuse to debate with, because I don't debate with Israeli supporters of Zionism any more than I would debate with South African supporters of apartheid back in the day. That person is now the official spokesman for the government of Israel. Amazing. Go ahead, Hussein.
Yes, nothing surprising here, Mr. Galloway. All spokespersons of that entity are like maniacs and schizophrenics and sociopaths. So nothing surprising here. I just want to wish you all the best in all your endeavors, especially political endeavors. Hope we have more like you in power in Western governments, so that they would speak for the oppressed, like you have been speaking all your life for Palestinians, for Lebanese, against wars, against everything. We just hope that people like you are, always have their voice up and strong voice. And I would like to thank you for all your stances.
God bless you, Hussein. La shukra ala wajib, Habibi. La shukra ala wajib. I'm doing my duty. Don't thank me for doing my duty. There are millions of us now all over the world. There are millions, in our thousands, in our millions. And we are all Palestinians. I am Spartacus. That is the cry that has resounded in every town and city in the world over these last 4 months. And whilst not everyone has the experience and the ability to make the arguments in the way that I do on the stump, on the platform, on television, here on the MOATS, they will. One of my missions in whatever remains of my life is to help generate a new layer of leaders that are more than capable of arguing this cause, these causes. So God bless you. God bless Lebanon. Paul Meany said, around the entire world, we in our billions are all Julian Assanges and Palestinians. It's a badge of honor to stand against the mass starvation, genocide, Holocaust, war crimes against the Palestinians. And Ange says, I have no legal qualifications, but even I knew that Starmer was out of order, and you can't starve people, etc., and adhere to international law. On the line is the legend Norma in Bristol. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. I don't know if you've actually saw it, but on Twitter, there were these pictures of these MPs. I think there were 2 Tories and 1 Northern Ireland MP. Now, they were seen wearing these, they're called Israeli dog tags. They hang around their necks, which are symbols of the IDF soldiers that pledged their allegiance, I'm reading this, to Israeli actions. And I mean, did you see that? They're like oblong in shape. I didn't, but who is it that had them on, these lanyards? Well, to be honest, I had the picture on Twitter. And there were 2 Tories, and there was 1 Northern Ireland on the pictures. And I mean, I was shocked to see it. I think that it's like allegiance to the Israeli actions, I mean, well, they certainly have no allegiance to the faith that they profess to follow, because if they did, they would be on our side of the argument. Why so many Western politicians, virtually all of them in every parliament in the Western world, are in the face of such overwhelming, heartbreaking, gut-wrenching evidence, still in favor of Netanyahu's assault on Gaza, on Jerusalem, on the West Bank? Well, I can only imagine. Norma, thank you for that call. Jack Klugman says, Belgium refused to cut off aid to UNRWA. Next day, Israel bombed Belgium's center in Gaza. It is who they are. Thank you, Jack. Ange again says, Cornel West in the USA needs voting in by Americans, as he's a great, fair guy, and said he'd pardon Assange. West would do so much good for America and the rest of the world. And Pittsburgh Dude 87 says, I only say joining the army of a foreign government shouldn't be banned because of the example of the international brigades of anti-fascists who fought for the Spanish Republic in the war against Franco. Doug is on the line in California on Palestine. Go ahead, Doug.
Hey, thank you, Mr. GG. That's what everybody in the chat's calling you, GG.
Okay,
but I want to talk about the UN asylum law and how it applies to the Palestinians in Gaza and their claims for asylum in Egypt. And what about the French hospital ship that's dealing with the Palestinians in Gaza? Couldn't the Palestinians claim asylum on that flagship of France?
But why should they leave their country? They're already refugees in their country by being in Gaza in the first place. Why should they leave Gaza? Why isn't the world coming to their rescue?
No, the question is, why can't they ask for asylum either on that French hospital ship or in Egypt itself?
Because they don't want to go to Egypt. They want to stay in Palestine.
But they're at war. They're heading for the Egyptian border. You're calling it genocide. So if it's really genocide, then Egypt should take in their own brothers and sisters.
Doug, well, they're not their brothers and sisters. The Palestinians are not Egyptians, and the Egyptians are not Palestinians. And you are what I call a concerned troll. You pretend that you are concerned about the plight of the Palestinians, and you urge them to seek political asylum in France on a ship. What are they going to swim out to it? Even if they were of a mind to ask France to take them away from their own country, or General Sisi to take them away from their own country. This is a despicable idea. The Palestinians are Palestinian. It's their land. It has been taken from them. And if they were to go to Egypt or swim out to a French ship, they would never be allowed back to their country again. Just like millions of other Palestinians are not allowed back to their country again. Be gone with you, Doug in California. Ali is in London on Palestine. Go ahead, Ali.
Hi, George. Nice to meet you, and greetings to everyone who's listening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for all that you've done and continue to do. I wish you all the very best in Rochdale.
Thank you,
George. Obviously, what's happening in Palestine and specifically Gaza is just absolutely heartbreaking. Listening to your...
It's off the charts, isn't it? It's off the charts, Ali. It's literally off the charts. We've never seen anything like this before.
Exactly. It's dystopian. To describe it as dystopian is just an understatement. It's like it's like some kind of
nightmare.
Stephen King horror movie or something. Yeah. And listening to that very brave, very courageous doctor you had earlier, I think his name's Yasser Khan. Mm-hmm. It kind of broke me a little bit, as it did, I'm sure, to yourself as well. But George, I wanted to ask you. I know it's a very vague and arbitrary question, but where do you see this going? Because there are, I don't know, something like 1.5 million people stuffed into Rafah, and you've got Rafah. The Egyptians. Yeah,
Ali, you're in London. Ali, you're in London. Do you know that Rafah is the size of Heathrow Airport? And 1.6 million people are lying on the ground. If they're lucky, under a sheet. if they're unlucky, on the cold ground with no cover at all. Rafah is the size of Heathrow Airport and has become now the epicenter of a genocide. It's amazing, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely unbelievable, and I mean, I don't know where this is going, because you've got all of these people there. You've got, I think I read somewhere 650,000 children there, and you've got
just in Rafah,
the Egyptians on the other side, saying basically not, you know, that they can't come in the best possible way. You know, like I can see where the Egyptians are coming from, but these people are unbelievably desperate. So where do you see personally it going? You know,
I don't know. I expected that the ICJ judgment would put more pressure on Western governments than it evidently has. So they seem completely unmoved. Indeed, several of them, including our own, have simply rejected the decision of the highest court in the whole world. They have simply rejected it. And in the case of KeirStarmer, haven't even referred to it. So ignored it. Never mind rejected it, just completely ignored it, as if it had never happened. So where it's going will be determined by how much damage this carnage is doing on Western governments amongst their own public. I think the damage is considerable. I think the damage on Sunak and particularly on Starmer is considerable. I think the damage on Biden is terminal, fatal. I think it will destroy the presidency of Joe Biden and indeed any possibility of he or his understudy, Kamala Harris, being elected president in November. Because on the principle that a surgeon cannot operate on his own foot, cannot amputate his own foot, this will have to be resolved from outside. The world governments, Russia, China, America, Britain, France, etc., will have to impose a political settlement with all the sanctions that will be required upon Israel to enforce that imposed ending. Whether there'll be any Palestinians left in Gaza remains to be seen. I worked on the assumption that the world would not surely stand by and see 2.3 million people annihilated, literally wiped off the face of the earth. I'm no longer sure that that was true, that hope, belief was true. But as long as one Palestinian remains alive, their cause will never die. It is age-old and evergreen, and it is joined daily by new Palestinians being born everywhere around the world, including in Palestine itself. Ali, thank you for the call from London. Idris is in nearby Bolton on Palestine. Go ahead, Idris.
Hi, George. Thanks for having me again. I actually rang you during the temporary ceasefire, and I actually asked you effectively the same question as the previous caller. Where do you think this is going? And I think you said to me that the likelihood is that the ceasefire would be extended. I think, forgive me, but I think even you underestimated the depravity of the Israeli government, because it clearly didn't. The ceasefire clearly wasn't extended, right? Now I'm gonna try and answer the previous caller's question, right? This was never about Hamas. This was never about even the hostages. This was always about the annihilation of the Palestinians, right? The fact that they've bombed schools, universities, essentially what the doctor that was on that said before, he effectively said that it's not about just taking out the hospital. It's about taking out the infrastructure. So it makes Gaza completely uninhabitable, right? So for me, this was always intended to be the removal of all of the Palestinians. And they've managed to do that. They're all now piled up in the south, right? And I think their intention now is to drive them into the Sinai. And unfortunately, I believe the governments in the West are completely complicit. They know what's going on. It's the same situation as Iraq. They knew Saddam didn't have weapons of mass destruction, and this is exactly the same, right? Now, I agree, I completely agree with what you just said earlier. It depends on what they can get away with. Now, the public opinion is such that it may be that these governments that are in power, the public opinion is such that they've got to now back some sort of ceasefire like KeirStarmer just has, in order to avoid the public going against him. That might well happen. But I think to answer the previous caller's question, the goal is very, very simple. It's greater Israel. Israel is for the Jews. And until the Palestinians are eliminated, they're not going to stop. And once Gaza's been done with, they're going to go to the West Bank. So forgive me,
Indeed,
George.
I don't. Yeah, last time because I'm past time. Go ahead, finish up.
What I just said at the end was it's not necessarily a question. It's a summation for me, and I'd like your opinion on this.
Well, of course, I agree with every word of it. It is my view, oft expressed over 50 years, and so you won't find any argument with me. And that was a very powerful call to finish what I think has been an outstanding show, even by the standards of the mother of all talk shows. I think it has been an outstanding show. People often say, what can they do? Well, one of the things you can do is make sure that this show continues. Maybe even bring this show out 3 times a week instead of twice a week. Maybe bring us some more viewers. Maybe ensure that everyone that you know knows how to find us, when to find us, where to find us. You can donate at moats.tv/donate. You can support me on Patreon. But if you don't have the money to do that, at least bring more viewers so that the audience of this show continues to multiply. That's all for me, indeed more than all from me. I'm 2 minutes over the hour. Forgive me to my colleagues who make this show a possibility. I'm live in Rochdale. I hope to continue broadcasting from here. And I hope that you and others that you know will join me. Good night.